This is Land of Fabula, Psalm 29. It's 11 verses. In this psalm, David's ecstatic about God from start to finish. He's in a very worshipful mood. Verse 1. A psalm by David. Ascribe to Yahweh, you sons of the mighty. Ascribe to Yahweh glory and strength. Ascribe to Yahweh the glory due his name. Worship Yahweh in holy array. Yahweh's voice is on the waters. The God of glory thunders, even Yahweh on many waters. Yahweh's voice is powerful. Yahweh's voice is full of majesty. Yahweh's voice breaks the cedars. Yes, Yahweh breaks in pieces the cedars of Lebanon. He makes them also to skip like a calf, Lebanon and Syrian like a young wild ox. Yahweh's voice strikes with flashes of lightning. Yahweh's voice shakes the wilderness. Yahweh shakes the wilderness of Kadesh. Yahweh's voice makes the deer calve and strips the forest bare. In his temple everything says glory. Yahweh sat enthroned at the flood. Yes, Yahweh sits as king forever. Yahweh will give strength to his people. Yahweh will bless his people with peace. Comment in verses 1 and 2. David's target audience for this psalm is the sons of the mighty. Quote, Ascribe to Yahweh, you sons of the mighty. Ascribe to Yahweh glory and strength. End quote. God's people go by different names in the Bible: believers, brothers, fellow workers, servants, Israel, saints, sons of God, Christians, and so on. Let's add to the list sons of the mighty, as in verse 1, we're sons of the mighty. In verse 2, ascribe to Yahweh strength and the glory due his name. We naturally slip into a mode of underestimating God, of not giving him his due. Anytime we give up on a prayer, we're not giving him his due. If he's all that powerful and glorious, he can change things, right? So let's give him his due, and it'll change the type of prayers we pray. We'll believe he can produce results. And in verse 2, worship Yahweh in holy array, meaning dress for the occasion. Put on the right clothing to worship, which really God's a lot more concerned about us spiritually, that we put on Christ, Galatians 3:27, that we put on the full armor of God, Ephesians 6:11, than of what we put on our bodies, Luke 16:19-31. Even wearing filthy clothing to worship is okay if that's all we can do, James 2:2, but we do need to dress respectfully and do everything respectfully, quote, respect what is honorable in the sight of all men, Romans 12:17. So let's not be offensive in our dress. Then in verses 3 through 10, they're so poetic in describing Yahweh's glory and power, it seems ordinary descriptions won't do. Yahweh's voice is so powerful it breaks the mighty cedar trees of Lebanon and makes Syrians skip like a wild ox. Syrian's another name for Mount Hermon, Deuteronomy 3:9. If you think Mount Hermon is massive and immovable, Yahweh doesn't see it that way. His voice can make it dance. His voice strikes like lightning in verse 7, shakes the wilderness in verse 8, strips the leaves right off the trees in verse 9. So that's how high he can turn up the volume of his voice anytime he chooses. Before there were concert-quality megawatt speakers so big and loud they could make you deaf, David conceived of Yahweh's voice stripping and breaking trees and shaking mountains. In verse 10, Yahweh sat enthroned at the flood, which could be the flood of Genesis chapter 6, but the verb can also be translated in the present tense. Yahweh sits enthroned over the flood. The point is that floods are powerful, but Yahweh more so. He's king over them. And in the final verse, what will Yahweh do with all that power? Will he break and smash things? Maybe. But for sure, he'll use his power to give strength to his people. He'll bless his people with peace. Psalm 30 is next.